Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to Her True Stories. I'm your host, and today we have Ella Sanders sharing a story that will redefine everything you think you know about the word perfect. If you're new here, we share real stories from real women who've faced betrayal, heartbreak, and challenges that would break most people, but instead found their inner strength and fought back in ways that will leave you speechless. Don't just listen and leave. Hit subscribe so you'll never miss another story that speaks to your soul. Ring that notification bell because Ella's journey of quiet revenge is about to show you that sometimes the most devastating victories come not from the loudest battles, but from the most patient strategies. Now, let's dive into a story about perfection, perception, and the beautiful art of poetic justice. My name is Ella Sanders, and I want to tell you about the moment my daughter handed me the ammunition I needed to destroy someone's life, though she had no idea that's what she was doing. It was a Tuesday evening in late September, and we were sitting in Romano's, that little Italian place on 5th Street that had become our monthly tradition since her father and I divorced 3 years ago. The restaurant was buzzing with the usual dinner crowd, couples sharing wine and families celebrating small occasions, the kind of warm, comfortable atmosphere that makes you believe in the possibility of happiness. My daughter Emma, 22 and luminous with the kind of beauty that comes from never having your heart truly broken, was twirling her pasta around her fork with the careless grace that only young people possess. I was listening to her talk about her new job at the marketing firm, her apartment in the city, her boyfriend who was probably the one, Mom, I really think he might be. At 58, I'd learned to treasure these evenings with Emma. After the divorce, after the bitter custody battles and the lawyers, and the division of assets that felt more like the division of a life, these monthly dinners had become my anchor. They reminded me that despite everything Richard had put me through, despite all the ways he had tried to diminish me during our 18-year marriage, I had raised a remarkable daughter. Emma had Richard's dark hair and my green eyes, but more importantly, she had inherited what I'd always considered the best of both of us, his intelligence and my intuition, his ambition and my empathy. She was everything I had hoped she would become, which made what happened next so much more devastating. Mom, Emma said, setting down her fork and looking at me with that earnest expression she'd worn since childhood when she was about to say something she thought was important. I need to tell you something. I smiled, expecting to hear about a promotion or a vacation plan or maybe an engagement announcement. What is it, sweetheart? I've been spending some time at Dad's house lately. My smile didn't waver, though something cold settled in my stomach. That's nice, honey. I'm sure he loves having you around. Yeah, he does. And Madison. She paused, and I saw her searching for the right words. Madison. The 29-year-old yoga instructor Richard had married 6 months after our divorce was finalized. The woman who had been the subject of whispered conversations and pitying looks from friends who thought they were protecting me by not mentioning her name. Madison's really wonderful, Mom. She's so kind and thoughtful, and she makes Dad really happy. She's been trying so hard to make me feel welcome, and I can tell she genuinely cares about our family. I nodded, still smiling, still waiting for the point of this conversation. Emma took a deep breath and looked me directly in the eyes. You're such a loving mom, but Dad's new wife? She's perfect. The restaurant went quiet in my head. Not actually quiet. The conversations and clinking silverware and soft jazz music continued around us, but quiet in the way that significant moments create their own bubble of silence while the rest of the world fades into background noise. Perfect. I smiled and nodded and took a sip of my water. I didn't argue. I didn't ask Emma to elaborate. I didn't express hurt or anger or any of the emotions that were suddenly coursing through me like electricity through water. Because when someone hands you a loaded gun, you don't fire it right away. You wait until you can't miss. Don't be mad, Mom, Emma continued, misinterpreting my silence as wounded feelings rather than the calculating quiet it actually was. I'm just saying that she's really good for Dad, and maybe it would be nice if you could try to get to know her better. For family occasions and holidays and stuff. I'm not mad, honey, I said, and my voice was perfectly calm, perfectly loving, perfectly normal. I'm glad your father is happy, but I was already making a list. Emma relaxed, relieved that I had taken her revelation so well. She went back to her pasta and started talking about her boyfriend again, about their plans for the weekend, about a concert they were going to see. I listened and responded appropriately, asked the right questions, made the right noises of interest and approval. Inside, however, I was conducting a very different conversation. Perfect, was she? I thought about Madison Sterling. I knew her maiden name because I had done my research when she first appeared in Richard's life. 29 years old, blonde, Instagram pretty in that carefully curated way that required an hour of preparation to look natural. A yoga instructor at an upscale studio who drove a white BMW that she couldn't afford and lived in an apartment that was too expensive for someone in her profession. Madison, who had slid into Richard's life with the practiced ease of someone who understood exactly what middle-aged men wanted to hear. Madison, who posted inspirational quotes on social media while pursuing a married man. Madison, who had played the role of the other woman with just enough restraint to seem like she wasn't really trying to steal someone's husband. Perfect Madison, who had somehow convinced my daughter that she was worthy of admiration and respect. As Emma chatted about her life and her plans and her bright future, I began to think about Madison's past. Because everyone has a past, and people who appear perfect usually have the most to hide. The dinner continued pleasantly. Emma and I split a tiramisu and talked about her upcoming birthday plans. I paid the check and walked her to her car and hugged her goodbye, telling her how proud I was of the woman she was becoming, how much I loved our monthly dinners, how excited I was to hear about her next adventure. But as I drove home to my quiet house, the house I had kept in the divorce settlement, the house where I had raised Emma, the house that Richard had been so eager to leave, I was already planning my next moves. People think revenge is about emotion. They think it's about anger and hurt and the need to lash out when you've been wounded. But that kind of revenge is messy and obvious and usually ineffective. Real revenge is about patience. It's about information. It's about understanding your target so completely that you can predict exactly how they'll respond to pressure, exactly where they're most vulnerable, exactly what will cause them the most damage with the least effort on your part. I have been married to Richard for 18 years. I knew how he thought, how he made decisions, what he valued most, and what he feared most. More importantly, I knew that his new wife was 29 years old and had probably never experienced real adversity, real pressure, real consequences for her choices. Madison thought she was perfect. My daughter thought she was perfect. Richard certainly thought she was perfect. But perfection, I knew, was usually just another word for hasn't been tested yet. It was time to administer a test. Before we continue with Ella's incredible story, I want to remind you that you're not alone if you've ever felt replaced, dismissed, or compared unfavorably to someone else. Sometimes the people we love most can wound us deepest without even realizing it. Hit that like button if you're feeling Ella's quiet strength, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that being underestimated can actually be your greatest advantage. Now let's see how Ella begins to research the perfect Madison. Madison Sterling, soon to be Madison Sanders, though she had kept her maiden name for her yoga business, had constructed her life like a carefully curated Instagram feed. Everything was beautiful, everything was intentional, and everything was designed to create the impression of effortless perfection. I knew this because I had spent the 3 days following Emma's dinner revelation conducting what I like to think of as a thorough background investigation. Not stalking, I want to be very clear about that, but the kind of legitimate research that any concerned parent might do when a new person enters their family's life. Madison's social media presence was a masterclass in personal branding. Her Instagram account showcased a life of gentle luxury, artfully arranged smoothie bowls, sunset yoga poses on pristine beaches, inspirational quotes overlaid on photos of her in expensive athleisure wear. She had 43,000 followers, which seemed impressive until you realized that most of them were purchased accounts from overseas bot farms. Her LinkedIn profile described her as a wellness entrepreneur and certified yoga instructor, though her certifications were from online programs that required more credit card information than actual training. She listed herself as the owner of Sterling Wellness Solutions, which sounded substantial until you discovered it was just her teaching private yoga sessions to wealthy housewives in their home studios. But it was her Facebook profile, the one she thought was private but wasn't quite secure enough, that revealed the most interesting information. Madison had grown up in a small town in Nevada, the daughter of a mechanic and a grocery store clerk. She had been homecoming queen, captain of the cheerleading squad, and the kind of girl who had been told she was special so often that she never learned how to be anything else. After high school, she had bounced between community college, cosmetology school, and a brief stint as a cocktail waitress in Las Vegas before discovering that yoga instruction offered a more respectable way to monetize her appearance. There was nothing wrong with any of this, of course. Everyone deserves to reinvent themselves, to pursue their dreams, to build a better life than the one they were born into. But Madison's reinvention involved some creative editing of her personal history and some questionable financial decisions that suggested her perfect life was built on a foundation that was less stable than it appeared. The BMW, for instance, was leased at a monthly payment that consumed nearly half of what a yoga instructor could realistically earn. Her apartment in the trendy part of town cost more than most people's mortgages. Her wardrobe, skincare routine, and lifestyle maintenance required a level of investment that didn't align with her documented income. How was she affording this lifestyle? The answer, I suspected, lay in the careful way she had cultivated relationships with wealthy older men over the years. Madison had a pattern of dating successful professionals who were going through difficult periods in their lives: divorces, career transitions, midlife crises. She provided comfort, admiration, and the kind of uncomplicated devotion that made men feel younger and more vital than they had in years. Richard fit the pattern perfectly. 55 years old, recently divorced, successful but insecure about aging, desperate to prove that he was still attractive and relevant. Madison had found him at exactly the right moment, when he was most vulnerable to the kind of validation she specialized in providing. But there was something else I discovered during my research, something that made me pause and reconsider my initial impression of Madison as simply an opportunistic gold digger. She was actively cruel to the women whose husbands she targeted. I found this out through a series of screenshots that had been posted in a private Facebook group for divorced women in our area. One of the members had shared her experience with Madison, who had been involved with her husband during their separation. Madison hadn't been content to simply steal the husband. She had gone out of her way to humiliate the wife, showing up at places she knew the woman would be, making pointed comments about appearance and age, even going so far as to wear the wife's jewelry to public events after the husband had given it to her. There were 3 other similar stories in the group's archives. Madison had a pattern of not just pursuing married men, but of deliberately targeting and tormenting their wives. She seemed to take genuine pleasure in the pain she caused, in the way she could make other women feel inadequate and unwanted. This was personal for her. This wasn't just about money or security or even love. This was about winning, about proving her superiority, about establishing dominance over women she saw as competition. Which meant that what she had done to me, and what she was undoubtedly still doing, wasn't just collateral damage from her relationship with Richard. It was intentional, calculated, malicious. Madison had moved into Richard's life with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before. She had redecorated his house, replacing the warm, lived-in feeling we had created together with the kind of sterile perfection you saw in home design magazines. She had convinced him to buy new furniture, new art, new everything, effectively erasing any trace of the life he had shared with me. More insidiously, she had worked to turn Emma against me. Not obviously, Madison was too smart for that. But through small comments, subtle comparisons, and the kind of backhanded compliments that left you feeling diminished without being able to explain exactly why. "Your mom is so sweet," she would say to Emma, "but don't you think she's a little stuck in the past? I keep trying to encourage your dad to help her find some hobbies or maybe update her look a little. It's sad when women give up on themselves after divorce." Or, "I love how close you and your mom are, but I worry that she's becoming a little too dependent on you for emotional support. That's not really fair to you, is it? You should be focusing on your own life, not managing your mother's feelings." Emma, bless her heart, was too young and too trusting to recognize these comments for what they were, a systematic campaign to undermine my relationship with my daughter, while positioning Madison as the wise, caring stepmother who only wanted what was best for everyone. The perfect wife was perfect at manipulation, perfect at cruelty, and perfect at making other people feel imperfect by comparison. But as I sat in my home office, surrounded by printouts and screenshots and carefully organized files of information, I realized that Madison had made one crucial mistake in her campaign of psychological warfare. She had underestimated me. Madison saw me as Richard had trained her to see me, the bitter ex-wife, the woman who couldn't compete with her youth and beauty, the fading reminder of a life he was eager to forget. She assumed that, like her previous victims, I would suffer in silence, lick my wounds in private, and eventually fade away into irrelevance. She had no idea that I was actually a Harvard-educated attorney who had given up my career to support Richard's ambitions and raise our daughter. She didn't know that I had helped build the financial foundation that was now supporting her lifestyle. She certainly didn't realize that I had spent 18 years married to a man who specialized in finding and exploiting other people's weaknesses. Richard had taught me well, though he probably didn't realize it. I had watched him destroy business rivals, personal enemies, and anyone who stood in the way of what he wanted. I had seen him smile and shake hands with people while simultaneously orchestrating their professional downfall. I had learned from a master, and now it was time to put that education to use. Madison thought she was perfect. She had convinced my daughter she was perfect. She had apparently convinced Richard and everyone else in their social circle that she was perfect. But perfection, as I was about to demonstrate, was often just another word for hasn't been properly investigated yet. Time to conduct a more thorough investigation. The thing about being an attorney, even a retired one, is that you never really lose the instinct for investigation. You learn to see patterns where other people see coincidences, to ask the right questions in the right order, and to understand that every person's life contains secrets they would pay dearly to keep hidden. Madison Sterling had secrets. I was certain of it. The question was how to uncover them without leaving any fingerprints of my own in the process. I started small and methodical, the way I used to approach complex litigation cases. First, I needed to understand the full scope of her life, her relationships, her financial situation, and her vulnerabilities. Then I could begin to identify pressure points and develop a strategy for applying pressure in the most effective way possible. My first move was to reach out to Sarah Chin, an old law school friend who now worked as a private investigator specializing in domestic cases. Sarah and I had kept in touch over the years, and she owed me a favor from when I had helped her navigate a difficult custody situation during her own divorce. "I need some background information on someone," I told Sarah over lunch at a discreet restaurant downtown. "Nothing illegal, nothing that would violate anyone's privacy. Just public records, social media analysis, that sort of thing." Sarah raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Personal or professional?" "Personal. My ex-husband's new wife. I have some concerns about her influence on my daughter." which was true as far as it went. Sarah spent 2 weeks conducting her investigation, and the results were fascinating. Madison's financial situation was even more precarious than I had suspected. She was carrying over $60,000 in credit card debt, had defaulted on 2 previous car loans, and was 3 months behind on her apartment rent. Her yoga business generated less than $15,000 per year in actual income, most of which came from the private sessions she taught to wealthy clients. But more interesting was what Sarah discovered about Madison's past. The move to our city had been precipitated by some unpleasant circumstances in her previous location. She had been involved in a lawsuit with a former business partner who accused her of embezzling money from their joint yoga studio venture. The case had been settled out of court, but the details suggested that Madison had indeed taken money that didn't belong to her. There was also a tax lien from the state of Nevada for unpaid income taxes from 5 years ago. The amount was relatively small, around $8,000, but the lien was still active and had apparently been forgotten rather than resolved. "She's living completely beyond her means," Sarah told me as she handed over her report. "The only way this lifestyle makes sense is if someone else is paying for most of it. Someone like Richard, in other words." But there was something else Sarah had discovered, something that made my pulse quicken with possibility. Madison had incorporated Sterling Wellness Solutions as an LLC in Nevada, listing herself as the sole owner and operator. The business had never filed proper tax returns, had never obtained the necessary licenses for operation in California, and was technically operating illegally by conducting business across state lines without proper registration. This was the kind of minor regulatory violation that most people never worried about because it was rarely enforced. But it was also exactly the kind of technical infraction that could cause massive problems if someone with the right knowledge decided to make an issue of it. I thanked Sarah for her excellent work and paid her fee without hesitation. Then I went home and began phase 2 of my investigation. I needed to get closer to Madison, to understand her daily routines, her relationships, and most importantly, her weaknesses. But I couldn't do this directly. Any obvious interest from the ex-wife would be suspicious and might alert her to what I was planning. Instead, I decided to approach her through her professional life. I created a fake social media profile under the name Elena Rodriguez, complete with photos I purchased from a stock photography site and a backstory about being a recently divorced executive looking to rebuild her life through wellness and fitness. Elena was exactly the kind of client Madison targeted: older, wealthy, emotionally vulnerable, and eager to spend money on self-improvement. Elena reached out to Sterling Wellness Solutions requesting information about private yoga instruction and personal wellness coaching. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Madison was clearly in need of new clients. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near her apartment to discuss Elena's wellness goals and determine whether they would be a good fit for working together. I wore a wig, different makeup, and the kind of expensive athleisure outfit that Elena's character would wear. I practiced a slight accent and a different way of speaking until I was confident that Madison wouldn't recognize me. The meeting was illuminating. Madison arrived 15 minutes late, apologized briefly, and immediately launched into what was clearly a well-rehearsed sales pitch about the transformative power of personalized wellness coaching. She was charming and energetic, but I could see the calculation behind her smile, the way she was assessing Elena's worth as a potential client. "I work with a very select group of women," Madison explained, "successful professionals who understand that investing in yourself is the most important investment you can make. My clients typically see dramatic improvements not just in their physical fitness and flexibility, but in their confidence, their relationships, their entire approach to life." She quoted prices that were 3 times what most yoga instructors charged, justifying the premium by emphasizing her exclusive approach and personalized attention. She also made it clear that she expected payment in advance and that her services were in high demand. But what struck me most was how she talked about her other clients. Madison had no professional discretion whatsoever. She gossiped freely about their personal lives, their relationships, their insecurities, and failures. She seemed to take genuine pleasure in revealing embarrassing details about women who trusted her with their personal struggles. I have one client who's been married for 20 years, but she's absolutely convinced her husband is cheating, Madison said with a laugh. She spends half our sessions crying about it, and I keep telling her that if she took better care of herself, maybe he wouldn't be looking elsewhere. But some women just refuse to take responsibility for their own problems, you know? This was how Madison saw the world, as a competition where some women won and others lost, where success was measured by your ability to take what you wanted from other people, where empathy was weakness and cruelty was strength. Elena scheduled a series of private sessions and paid in advance with a credit card tied to one of my business accounts. Over the next month, I met with Madison twice a week, gradually drawing her out about her life, her goals, and her relationship with Richard. Madison couldn't resist talking about her perfect life with her perfect husband. She described Richard as brilliant and successful and mature, everything that younger men lacked. She talked about their plans to travel, to buy a bigger house, to start a family in a few years when her business was more established. But she also revealed insecurities and resentments that she probably didn't realize she was expressing. She complained about Richard's ex-wife, describing me as bitter and jealous, and unable to accept that he had moved on. She worried about his relationship with Emma, afraid that his daughter didn't fully accept her yet. She expressed frustration with the financial constraints that prevented her from living the lifestyle she believed she deserved. Most importantly, she talked about her business plans. Madison had big dreams for Sterling Wellness Solutions. She wanted to expand into corporate wellness consulting, develop online courses, maybe even write a book about wellness and personal transformation. She was actively looking for investors and business partners who could help her take her company to the next level. "I know I could be huge in this space," she told me during one of our sessions. "I have the knowledge, the charisma, the vision. I just need the right opportunity to show people what I'm capable of." This was the opening I had been looking for. Elena expressed interest in potentially investing in Madison's business expansion. She mentioned that she had some capital available and was looking for opportunities to support other women entrepreneurs. She asked detailed questions about Madison's business structure, her finances, her growth projections. Madison was eager to share information that any competent business person would have kept confidential. She showed Elena her client lists, her revenue projections, her marketing strategies. She talked about her plans to expand into California without mentioning that she didn't have the proper licenses or registrations to operate legally in the state. By the end of our month of sessions, I had a complete picture of Madison's life, her business, her relationships, and most importantly, her vulnerabilities. I had documented evidence of her professional indiscretions, her financial desperation, and her illegal business operations. I also had something else: recordings of our conversations, taken with a small device that Elena wore during their sessions. These recordings captured Madison making derogatory comments about her clients, discussing confidential information, and describing her business practices in ways that violated several professional and legal standards. It was time to move to phase 3 of my plan. Madison thought she was perfect, but I now had proof that she was anything but. She had handed me the tools I needed to dismantle her life piece by piece, and she had done it while charging me money for the privilege. The irony was almost too delicious to bear. Ella's methodical approach is absolutely brilliant, isn't it? The way she's gathering intelligence while Madison unknowingly provides all the ammunition needed for her own destruction. That's strategic patience at its finest. If you're impressed by Ella's investigative skills, hit that like button and share this with someone who appreciates the art of long-term planning. We're about to see Ella make her first move, and trust me, you won't want to miss this. Stay tuned. With my research complete and my strategy crystallized, it was time to begin the delicate process of offering Madison exactly what she wanted while ensuring that accepting it would ultimately destroy her. The approach needed to be subtle, believable, and beneficial enough that Madison wouldn't question my motives. It also needed to create a paper trail that would later demonstrate her willingness to engage in questionable business practices when it suited her interests. I decided to approach her through Richard. I called my ex-husband on a Thursday afternoon, timing the call for when I knew he would be in his office, but not in meetings. Richard and I had maintained a cordial but distant relationship since the divorce, communicating primarily about Emma and practical matters related to our shared assets. "Ella," he said when he answered, his voice carrying that slightly wary tone he used whenever we spoke. "Is everything all right with Emma?" "Emma's fine," I assured him. "I'm actually calling about Madison." I could hear the surprise in his silence. "I've been thinking about our conversation at Emma's birthday dinner," I continued, referencing a tense but civil gathering we had endured the previous month. "You were right that I should make more of an effort to accept Madison as part of our family. Emma clearly adores her, and I want to support that relationship." Richard's surprise shifted to cautious relief. That means a lot, Ella. I know this hasn't been easy for any of us." "I was thinking," I said, "Madison mentioned that she's looking to expand her wellness business. I have some contacts in the corporate consulting world who might be interested in what she's offering. Would you mind if I reached out to her directly to discuss some potential opportunities?" Richard was practically effusive in his gratitude. He gave me Madison's contact information and encouraged me to call her soon. "She's going to be so excited, Ella. This is really generous of you." Generous. If only he knew. I waited 2 days before calling Madison, giving Richard time to tell her about our conversation and prime her for my approach. When I did call, I used my real name and real voice, positioning myself as the gracious ex-wife who wanted to help her successor succeed. "Madison, it's Ella Sanders. Richard mentioned that you might be interested in expanding your wellness business into corporate consulting."
"Oh, ella."
Madison's voice was bright with surprised pleasure. "Richard told me you called. This is so wonderful of you. I have to admit, I wasn't sure you approved of me." "You make Richard happy," I said, which was true as far as it went. "And Emma adores you, which means you're family now. I believe in supporting family." We arranged to meet for coffee to discuss her business goals and my potential connections. Madison suggested the same coffee shop where I had met with her as Elena, which gave me a moment of private amusement. The meeting was a masterclass in manipulation disguised as collaboration. I arrived early and chose a corner table where we could speak privately. When Madison arrived, on time this time, now that she was meeting with someone she perceived as important, she was practically glowing with excitement and nervous energy. "I can't believe you're willing to help me with this," she said as she settled into her chair. "I know things have been awkward between us, and I really appreciate you reaching out." I smiled warmly. "The past is the past, Madison. What matters now is building a positive future for all of us." I let her talk first, encouraging her to describe her vision for Sterling Wellness Solutions and her goals for expansion. Madison painted an ambitious picture of corporate wellness programs, executive coaching services, and transformational retreats for high-powered professionals. "I know I have something special to offer," she said, her eyes bright with ambition. "I just need the right platform to demonstrate what I can do." "I think I might be able to help with that," I said. "I have a contact at a company that's looking to implement a comprehensive wellness program for their executive team. They're willing to pay premium rates for the right consultant, and they value innovation over traditional credentials." Madison leaned forward eagerly. "That sounds perfect. What kind of company?" "Import-export business. They work with manufacturers overseas and need someone who can help their executives manage stress, maintain focus, and optimize their performance during long hours and frequent travel." This was all true, technically. I did know such a company. I had found them through my business network and had already had preliminary conversations about their interest in wellness consulting services. What I hadn't mentioned to Madison was that this particular company operated in some regulatory gray areas and had previously been investigated for various compliance issues. The owner is someone I went to law school with, I continued. He's looking for a consultant who's flexible, discreet, and able to work within the unique constraints of international business. He's also willing to pay 50% above market rates for the right person. Madison's eyes widened at the mention of the premium compensation. That sounds amazing. What would I need to do? Initially, just provide some wellness consulting services to their executive team. But if things go well, there could be opportunities for longer-term collaboration, maybe even equity participation in some of their ventures. I reached into my purse and pulled out a business card and some professionally printed materials I had prepared. Here's his contact information and some background on the company. Why don't you reach out to him directly and mention that I referred you? The business card was real, though the materials contained some subtle inaccuracies that any competent businessperson would have caught with proper due diligence. The company existed, but it wasn't quite what I had described it to be. Madison took the materials eagerly, already mentally spending the income she expected to earn. This is incredible, Ella. I don't know how to thank you. Just be the best version of yourself, I said with a smile. That's all any of us can do. Over the next week, Madison reached out to my contact and began discussions about providing wellness consulting services to his company. The conversations went well initially. Madison was charming and enthusiastic, and the company was indeed interested in wellness services for their executives. But as the discussions progressed and contracts were drafted, certain details began to emerge. The company's business model involved working with overseas manufacturers who didn't always comply with U.S. labor and environmental standards. The wellness consulting would include helping executives manage the stress of making ethically questionable decisions in the name of profitability. Most problematically, the consulting contract required Madison to sign confidentiality agreements that could potentially implicate her in the company's regulatory violations if any issues arose in the future. A smart businessperson would have recognized these red flags and either declined the opportunity or insisted on significant modifications to the contract terms. A cautious person would have conducted thorough due diligence on the company before agreeing to any formal relationship. Madison did neither. Blinded by the promised compensation and the prospect of expanding her business, she signed contracts that she hadn't read carefully and agreed to terms that she didn't fully understand. She was so eager to succeed, so desperate to prove that her business was legitimate and scalable, that she ignored obvious warning signs in favor of chasing easy money. Within 2 weeks of our coffee shop meeting, Madison had formally entered into a consulting relationship that would later provide the basis for serious legal and professional complications. But she was delighted with her new opportunity. She posted about it on social media, describing her exciting new partnership with an innovative international business and her expansion into high-level corporate consulting. She bought new business attire with money she expected to earn, updated her LinkedIn profile to reflect her new role, and began describing herself as a corporate wellness strategist. Meanwhile, I quietly documented every step of the process. Every email, every signed contract, every public statement Madison made about her new business relationship. I created a comprehensive file that demonstrated how eagerly she had embraced an opportunity that any competent professional would have approached with extreme caution. Madison thought she was building her empire. What she was actually doing was constructing the foundation of her own downfall. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. Now it was time to wait for the right moment to spring it closed. But first I needed to address that little tax. While Madison was celebrating her new corporate consulting contract and planning how to spend money she hadn't earned yet, I was quietly constructing a more comprehensive web of evidence that would eventually strangle her perfect life. The tax lien from Nevada was the perfect place to start because it represented something Madison had forgotten about, a loose thread from her past that she assumed would never unravel. People like Madison, who live entirely in the present moment and focus only on their immediate desires, often leave behind trails of unfinished business that can resurface at the most inconvenient times. I contacted a business associate who specialized in tax resolution services, explaining that I had discovered some potential issues with a consultant I was considering hiring for a sensitive project. Without mentioning Madison by name, I described the situation and asked about the implications of working with someone who had unresolved tax obligations. Any active tax liens would need to be resolved before I could recommend them for corporate consulting work, my associate explained. Companies don't want to risk being associated with tax compliance issues, especially if the consultant is representing them in any official capacity. This gave me the framework I needed for the next phase of my plan. I created a detailed report on Madison's background, ostensibly for the company that had hired her as a wellness consultant. The report included her professional qualifications, her business registrations, her financial history, and, of course, the outstanding tax lien from Nevada. I sent this report to the company's compliance department, explaining that I had discovered some potential issues with their new consultant that might require attention before the relationship could continue. The response was immediate, exactly what I had anticipated. The company's legal department contacted Madison within 24 hours, informing her that they needed to suspend their consulting relationship pending resolution of her outstanding tax obligations and regulatory compliance issues. Madison was devastated. She called me that same evening, her voice tight with panic and confusion. "Ella, I don't understand what happened. The company says there are problems with my tax records, but I've never had any tax problems. Someone must have made a mistake." I made sympathetic noises while she explained the situation, offering comfort and concern in all the right moments. "That sounds frustrating, Madison. Have you checked your records to see if there might be something you overlooked?" "I'm going to call my accountant tomorrow," she said. "This has to be some kind of error. I can't afford to lose this contract, Ella. This was going to change everything for my business." "I'm sure it will work out," I assured her. "These things usually do." But of course, it wouldn't work out because the tax lien was real and valid, and resolving it would require Madison to pay not just the original amount owed but also years of accumulated interest and penalties. The $8,000 she had originally owed had grown to nearly $15,000, money she simply didn't have. Madison spent the next week frantically trying to resolve the situation. She hired a tax attorney, set up payment plans, and even considered borrowing money to pay off the lien immediately. But the process was complicated and time-consuming, and the company wasn't willing to wait for resolution. After 10 days, they formally terminated their consulting agreement with Madison, citing unresolvable compliance issues that made the business relationship too risky to continue. Madison was crushed, but she was also angry. During our next phone conversation, I could hear the frustration and suspicion in her voice. "I can't help feeling like someone wanted this to happen," she said. "The timing is too perfect. Someone must have known about this tax thing and reported it to sabotage my opportunity." "Who would do something like that?" I asked innocently. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out. This feels personal, Ella. Like someone wants to see me fail." I expressed sympathy and outrage on her behalf, suggesting that perhaps it was just bad luck or a routine background check that had uncovered the old tax records. But I could tell that Madison was beginning to develop a paranoid edge, a sense that she was being deliberately targeted by someone with unknown motives, which was exactly what I wanted. Paranoia would make Madison reactive and impulsive. She would start seeing threats where none existed and responding to imaginary attacks in ways that would create real vulnerabilities. She would begin making mistakes driven by fear and anger rather than rational calculation. But I wasn't done building my paper trail. While Madison was dealing with her tax crisis, I had been working on another aspect of her professional life. The recordings I had made during my sessions with her as Elena Rodriguez contained clear evidence of multiple professional violations, breach of client confidentiality, discussion of inappropriate personal details, and unprofessional conduct in her role as a wellness consultant. I transcribed the most damaging portions of these recordings and sent them anonymously to the professional association that had certified Madison as a yoga instructor. I also sent copies to the Better Business Bureau and to several online review platforms where Sterling Wellness Solutions was listed. The professional association launched an investigation into Madison's conduct, requesting client testimonials and documentation of her business practices. The Better Business Bureau opened a case file and began accepting complaints about her services. The review platforms began flagging her business profile for investigation. Within 2 weeks, Madison received formal notices from multiple organizations questioning her professional conduct and requesting her response to various allegations. None of the allegations were serious enough to result in criminal charges, but they were all legitimate complaints that required time, attention, and potentially legal representation to resolve. Madison was now facing problems on multiple fronts: tax issues that were draining her financially, professional investigations that were threatening her credentials, and a growing sense of paranoia that someone was orchestrating her difficulties. The stress was beginning to show. Her social media posts became less frequent and less polished. Her usual inspirational quotes were replaced by vague complaints about negative people and jealous individuals who were trying to bring her down. Her carefully curated image of perfection was starting to crack under the pressure of dealing with real-world consequences. But the most beautiful part of my strategy was that none of it was actually illegal or even particularly unethical. I was simply bringing Madison's past mistakes to the attention of people who had a legitimate right to know about them. I was connecting her current behavior to appropriate oversight bodies. I was ensuring that the natural consequences of her choices were allowed to unfold without her being able to hide behind her perfect facade. Madison had built her life on a foundation of deception, corner-cutting, and exploitation of other people's trust. I was simply removing the supports that had allowed that foundation to remain stable for so long. As her world began to crumble around her, Madison became increasingly desperate and increasingly willing to take risks that would normally have seemed too dangerous to consider. Which brought me to phase 2 of my plan, the business partnership that would give Madison everything she thought she wanted while ensuring that getting it would ultimately destroy her. I had one more card to play, and it was going to be the most devastating of all. While Madison was scrambling to deal with her professional and financial crises, I was preparing to deliver the blow that would shatter her relationship with Richard and destroy any chance she had of recovering from her recent setbacks. The key to this phase of my plan was understanding Richard's psychology, as well as I understood Madison's vulnerabilities. After 18 years of marriage, I knew exactly what would make Richard question everything he believed about his perfect new wife, and I knew how to present that information in a way that would seem like concerned disclosure rather than vindictive sabotage. Richard valued honesty above almost everything else. It was one of his core principles, something he had inherited from his father and passed on to Emma. He could forgive mistakes, bad judgment, even moral failings, but he could not tolerate deception. The fastest way to lose Richard's trust was to lie to him, and the fastest way to lose his love was to make him feel like a fool for having trusted you. Madison had been lying to Richard from the moment they met. Small lies, mostly, about her background, her finances, her professional success. The kind of lies that people tell when they want to seem more impressive than they actually are. But lies nonetheless, and now I had documented evidence of every single one. I also had something even more powerful, proof that Madison had been actively deceiving Richard about her financial situation while using his money to support her lifestyle. During my investigation, I had discovered that Madison had been systematically hiding her debt from Richard while simultaneously using their joint credit accounts to pay for personal expenses. She had opened credit cards in his name without his knowledge, had borrowed money using his property as collateral, and had even forged his signature on several financial documents. This wasn't just deception, it was fraud. And it was exactly the kind of betrayal that would destroy any possibility of Richard ever trusting Madison again. But I needed to present this information in a way that didn't implicate me in the discovery process. Richard needed to find out about Madison's deception through channels that seemed natural and credible, not through information that could be traced back to his ex-wife's investigation. The solution came through Madison's own desperation. As her financial situation deteriorated and her professional prospects collapsed, Madison became increasingly reckless about covering her tracks. She started making larger withdrawals from joint accounts, taking cash advances on credit cards that Richard didn't know existed, and even selling some of Richard's possessions to raise money for her mounting debts. Richard began to notice these irregularities, but Madison had explanations for everything. The missing money was for business expenses that would be reimbursed soon. The sold items were things she was updating with better versions. The new credit card statements were for accounts she had opened to improve their credit score with strategic borrowing. Richard wanted to believe her explanations, so he did. But I could tell from Emma's casual comments about her father that he was beginning to feel uneasy about their financial situation without being able to identify exactly why. That's when I decided to provide him with some anonymous assistance. I created a detailed financial analysis showing the discrepancies between Madison's reported income and her actual spending, the credit accounts that had been opened without proper authorization, and the pattern of deceptive financial behavior that had been ongoing for months. I included copies of documents that Madison had signed, recordings of her discussing her financial problems, and evidence of her attempts to hide these issues from Richard. I sent this information to Richard anonymously, using an untraceable email account and presenting it as coming from a concerned friend who thought he should know the truth about his wife's financial activities. The email was carefully worded to seem like it came from someone who had legitimate access to this information, perhaps a financial professional who had worked with Madison, or a mutual acquaintance who had discovered her deception through their own business dealings. Richard received the email on a Friday afternoon. By Saturday morning, he was sitting in his home office going through financial records with the methodical thoroughness that had made him successful in his legal career. What he found was worse than what I had documented. Madison's deception was more extensive, more systematic, and more financially damaging than even I had realized. She had essentially been conducting a long-term embezzlement scheme against her own husband, using his trust and love as cover for a pattern of fraud that had been going on since shortly after their marriage. The confrontation happened that evening. I know this because Emma called me the next morning, confused and upset about what she had witnessed during a visit to her father's house. "Mom, something terrible happened between Dad and Madison last night," Emma said, her voice shaky with distress. "I went over there for dinner, and they were having this awful fight about money. Madison was crying and saying that Dad didn't understand her situation, and Dad was just... I've never seen him so angry." "What were they fighting about specifically?" I asked, careful to sound concerned rather than curious. "Dad found out that Madison has been hiding debts from him. Apparently, she owes a lot of money that he didn't know about, and she's been using his credit cards to pay for things without telling him. He showed me these financial documents and said that she's been lying to him about everything." Emma was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more uncertain. "Mom, Madison isn't perfect, is she? I mean, I thought she was so great, so put together, but if she's been lying about money and hiding things from Dad..." "People are complicated, sweetheart," I said gently. "Sometimes the image someone presents isn't the same as who they really are underneath." "I feel so stupid," Emma said. "I was telling everyone how amazing she was, how perfect she was for Dad. But if she's been deceiving him this whole time..." "You're not stupid, Emma. You saw the good things about Madison and appreciated them. That speaks well of your character." But it's also important to recognize that people can have good qualities and still make bad choices. Over the next few days, the full extent of Madison's deception became clear. Richard hired a forensic accountant to review their finances and discovered that Madison's lies had cost them over $40,000 in unauthorized debts and financial obligations. More damaging than the money, however, was the realization that their entire relationship had been built on a foundation of systematic deception. Richard was devastated, but he was also furious. The man who valued honesty above all else had been made a fool of by someone he had trusted completely. The woman he had thought was perfect had turned out to be a sophisticated con artist who had been using him from the very beginning. Madison tried to explain, to apologize, to minimize the extent of her deception. She claimed that she had been trying to protect Richard from her financial problems, that she had intended to resolve everything before he found out, that her lies had been motivated by love rather than selfish calculation. But Richard was a lawyer, and he could recognize a weak defense when he heard one. Madison's explanations didn't hold up under scrutiny, and her attempts to shift blame and minimize responsibility only made her situation worse. The marriage was over, though it would take several more weeks for the paperwork to be finalized. Madison's perfect life was collapsing exactly as I had planned, but the beautiful thing about my strategy was that I had simply accelerated the natural consequences of her own choices. She had created the vulnerabilities that I exploited, and she had made the decisions that led to her downfall. All I had done was ensure that the truth came to light a little sooner than it might have otherwise. The way Ella orchestrated Richard's discovery of Madison's deception is absolutely masterful, using Madison's own desperation and recklessness against her. Richard's devastation is palpable, and Emma's realization about Madison's true nature is heartbreaking but necessary. If you're feeling the satisfaction of watching someone's lies finally catch up with them, hit that like button and share this video. We're approaching the climax of Ella's perfect revenge, and you won't want to miss how completely Madison's world falls apart. Stay with us. The divorce proceedings began immediately, but Madison's problems extended far beyond the end of her marriage. The financial fraud she had committed against Richard created a cascade of legal and practical consequences that destroyed every aspect of her carefully constructed life. Richard, hurt and humiliated by the extent of Madison's deception, pursued the divorce with the methodical ruthlessness that had made him successful in his legal career. He hired the best family law attorney in the city and made it clear that he wanted Madison to face the full consequences of her fraudulent behavior. The forensic accountant's report revealed that Madison had stolen over $60,000 from Richard through various schemes, unauthorized credit card use, forged signatures on loan documents, and the sale of his personal property without consent. Richard filed criminal charges for fraud and theft, ensuring that Madison would face legal consequences beyond just the divorce settlement. But the criminal charges were only the beginning of Madison's problems. The professional associations that had been investigating her conduct accelerated their proceedings once news of her legal troubles became public. The Yoga Certification Board revoked her credentials, citing conduct unbecoming a certified professional and violations of ethical standards. The Better Business Bureau issued a formal warning about Sterling Wellness Solutions, effectively destroying any credibility her business might have retained. More devastating was the reaction of her client base. The wealthy women who had hired Madison for private yoga sessions and wellness coaching were horrified to learn that their trusted advisor had been engaged in fraud and deception. They canceled their contracts, demanded refunds, and spread word throughout their social networks that Madison was not to be trusted. Within a month, Sterling Wellness Solutions had 0 clients and a reputation that made finding new business impossible. Madison's financial situation went from precarious to catastrophic. The legal fees for her criminal defense consumed what little money she had left. The restitution she owed to Richard required her to liquidate her remaining assets, including her BMW and the designer wardrobe that had been so essential to her image. But perhaps most painful for Madison was the social ostracism that accompanied her legal troubles. The wealthy social circle she had worked so hard to infiltrate turned on her with vicious efficiency. Women who had pretended to be her friends revealed that they had never really accepted her, that they had always known she was not quite our type, that they had tolerated her only because of Richard's status and influence. The Instagram account that had showcased her perfect life went silent. The carefully curated image of success and sophistication was replaced by the reality of a woman facing criminal charges, financial ruin, and complete social isolation. Madison's landlord evicted her from the expensive apartment she could no longer afford. The luxury lifestyle she had maintained through credit and deception collapsed like a house of cards, leaving her with nowhere to go and no one willing to help her. She moved back in with her parents in Nevada, the same small town she had fled years earlier in search of a more glamorous life. The homecoming queen who had thought she was destined for greatness found herself living in her childhood bedroom, unemployed, unemployable, and facing potential prison time. Meanwhile, Richard was discovering just how extensively Madison had deceived him about every aspect of her life. The background she had claimed was largely fictional. The professional success she had boasted about was exaggerated or invented entirely. Even her expressions of love and devotion were revealed to be calculated performances designed to maintain his financial support. Richard was not just angry, he was humiliated. The successful attorney who prided himself on his ability to read people and situations had been completely fooled by a small-town con artist with fake credentials and a talent for manipulation. The humiliation was made worse by the fact that everyone in their social and professional circles knew what had happened. The story of Madison's deception spread through their community like wildfire, turning Richard into an object of pity and gossip. "I can't believe how blind I was," Richard told Emma during one of their difficult conversations about the divorce. "Everyone must think I'm a complete fool." Emma, who was struggling with her own feelings of betrayal and embarrassment, tried to comfort her father. "You trusted someone you loved, Dad. That doesn't make you a fool." But Richard's confidence was shattered. The man who had once been so certain of his judgment, so proud of his ability to see through people's facades, now questioned every relationship and every decision. The divorce was finalized with terms that were devastating to Madison. She received no alimony, no property settlement, and no financial support of any kind. Instead, she was required to pay restitution for the money she had stolen and to accept responsibility for all the debts she had accumulated during the marriage. Richard kept the house, the investments, and his professional reputation, though the latter had been significantly damaged by the scandal. Madison left the marriage with nothing but legal bills and criminal charges. But the most painful aspect of Madison's downfall was watching her relationship with Emma disintegrate completely. Emma, who had once praised Madison as perfect, now felt foolish and manipulated. She realized that Madison's kindness and attention had been calculated to win her loyalty and support, not expressions of genuine affection. The woman she had admired and defended had been using her as a pawn in a larger game of deception and exploitation. "I can't believe I fell for it," Emma told me during one of our dinners, her voice bitter with self-recrimination. "She made me feel special, like she really cared about me, but it was all fake. She was just using me to get closer to Dad and to make you look bad by comparison." "You're not responsible for Madison's choices," I reminded her gently. "You responded to what seemed like genuine kindness. That speaks well of your character, not poorly." "But I hurt you, Mom." "I said such terrible things, compared you to her, made you feel like you weren't good enough. And all the time, she was the one who wasn't good enough. She was lying and stealing and manipulating all of us." Emma's pain was real and deep, and I felt genuine sadness for what she had gone through. My daughter had learned a hard lesson about the difference between appearance and reality, between performance and authenticity. It was a lesson she needed to learn, but that didn't make it any less painful for either of us. I'm just glad you figured out the truth, I told her. Some people never do. As Madison's life fell apart completely, I watched from a distance with the satisfaction of someone who had executed a perfect plan. Every consequence she was facing was the direct result of choices she had made, lies she had told, and laws she had broken. I had simply ensured that those consequences couldn't be avoided or hidden any longer. Madison had called me perfect once, though I suspected she was beginning to understand just how imperfect her own life had become. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one final move to make, one last lesson to teach about the price of underestimating people and the danger of assuming that kindness equals weakness. Madison was about to learn that sometimes the most devastating victories are the quietest ones. 6 months after Madison's world began to collapse, she had lost everything that had once defined her identity. The criminal trial for fraud and theft resulted in a conviction and a sentence of 18 months in minimum security prison, followed by 2 years of probation and community service. The judge, unimpressed by Madison's tears and claims of remorse, noted that her crime showed a pattern of calculated deception designed to exploit the trust of others. The local newspaper covered the trial, describing Madison as a con artist who used yoga and wellness coaching to gain access to wealthy victims. The article included details about her fraudulent business practices, her tax evasion, and her systematic theft from her former husband. It was exactly the kind of public humiliation that someone like Madison, who had built her identity around image and reputation, would find unbearable. Madison served her sentence at a women's correctional facility 2 hours outside the city. The woman who had once posted daily photos of her perfectly curated life was now wearing a prison uniform and sharing a cell with women who had no interest in her former social status. When she was released, Madison found herself in an impossible situation. Her criminal record made it nearly impossible to find legitimate employment. Her professional certifications had been permanently revoked. Her reputation in the wellness industry was so damaged that no one would hire her, even for basic positions. The small town in Nevada, where her parents lived, offered no opportunities for someone with her background and limitations. Madison was forced to take a job cleaning houses for the same kind of wealthy women she had once counted as clients and friends. The irony was perfect and devastating. Madison, who had once judged other women for their age, their appearance, and their lack of sophistication, was now scrubbing their toilets and polishing their silver. The woman who had dismissed me as irrelevant was now performing the same kind of humble service that she had once mocked. But the most painful aspect of Madison's new reality was the knowledge that everyone in her current situation knew exactly who she was and what she had done. The wealthy women who hired her cleaning services made sure she understood that they were doing her a favor by giving her work, that she was lucky to have any employment at all given her criminal background. They treated her with the same casual cruelty she had once shown to other people, the same dismissive attitude she had displayed toward women she considered beneath her. The universe had a sense of justice that was more poetic than anything I could have devised. Meanwhile, Richard was slowly rebuilding his life, though the experience with Madison had left him changed in fundamental ways. He had become more cautious, more skeptical, more protective of his emotional investments. The man who had once been confident in his ability to judge character now questioned every new relationship and every expression of interest from potential partners. Emma and I had grown closer through the ordeal, our relationship strengthened by honesty about what had happened and why. She understood now that my quiet strength and unpretentious lifestyle were choices, not limitations. She appreciated the stability and authenticity I represented, qualities she had taken for granted before Madison's deception showed her how rare and valuable they actually were. "I'm sorry I ever compared you to her, Mom," Emma said during one of our dinners. I didn't understand what real strength looked like. I thought it was about being perfect and impressive, but you showed me that it's about being genuine and consistent and there for the people you love. You don't need to apologize for anything, I told her. You learned something important about the difference between substance and style. That's a lesson that will serve you well for the rest of your life. But there was still one more element to Madison's story that needed to be resolved, one final consequence that would complete the circle of justice I had been constructing. Madison's parents, embarrassed by their daughter's criminal behavior and tired of supporting her financially, finally issued an ultimatum. Find steady employment and contribute to the household expenses, or find somewhere else to live. Madison, desperate and running out of options, reached out to the only person she could think of who might still have some sympathy for her situation. She called me. The phone rang on a Tuesday evening as I was reading in my study, the same room where I had planned her downfall months earlier. When I saw her name on the caller ID, I felt a moment of surprise followed by a deep sense of completion.
¿Ella?
Madison's voice was different now, smaller, uncertain, stripped of the confident arrogance that had once characterized every word she spoke. Hello, Madison. I know I don't have any right to call you. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I'm desperate and I don't know who else to turn to. I waited in silence, letting her fill the space with her desperation. I'm living with my parents in Nevada, and they're going to kick me out if I don't find steady work soon. I can't get hired anywhere because of my record, and the only jobs available they're not enough to live on. She paused, and I could hear her taking a shaky breath. I was wondering, I know it's crazy to ask, but I was wondering if you might know of any opportunities. Maybe someone who would be willing to give me a chance despite my past. I would do anything, Ella. Anything honest and legal. I just need a way to survive. The irony of Madison asking me for help, asking me to save her from the consequences of her own actions, was so perfect that I almost laughed. The woman who had once dismissed me as irrelevant was now begging me for assistance. But I didn't laugh. Instead, I considered her request with the same careful calculation I had applied to every other aspect of our relationship. Madison, I said finally, you made choices that hurt a lot of people. My daughter, my ex-husband, the clients you deceived, and ultimately yourself. Those choices have consequences that can't be undone by apologies or requests for help. I know, she whispered. I know I don't deserve help. But I've lost everything, Ella. Everything. I just need a chance to start over. You have a chance to start over, I told her. You have every day for the rest of your life to make better choices than the ones you made before. But those choices have to come from you, not from other people rescuing you from the consequences of your actions. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I understand, Madison said finally. I'm sorry for calling. I'm sorry for everything. She hung up before I could respond, though I wouldn't have had much more to say anyway. Madison had learned the hardest lesson of all, that actions have consequences, that trust once broken is nearly impossible to rebuild, and that the people you dismiss as irrelevant might be the ones who ultimately determine your fate. It was a lesson that would follow her for the rest of her life, a reminder that perfection is often just another word for waiting to be exposed. Madison's complete fall from grace is both devastating and perfectly just. The way she's now reduced to begging the very woman she once dismissed, that's the kind of poetic justice that gives me chills. Ella's response shows such dignified strength, refusing to rescue Madison from the consequences of her own choices. If this powerful moment is hitting you as hard as it's hitting me, make sure you hit that like button and share this video. We're almost at the end of this incredible journey, but the conclusion is going to be absolutely perfect. Don't go anywhere. The call I had been expecting finally came on a cold February morning, almost exactly 1 year after Emma's fateful dinner table declaration about Madison's perfection. I was in my kitchen, making coffee and reading the newspaper, when my phone rang. Richard's name appeared on the screen, and I could tell from the early hour and the fact that he was calling on a weekday that this wasn't a casual conversation about Emma or practical matters related to our divorce settlement. Ella. His voice was heavy with exhaustion and something that sounded like desperation. I need your help. Please. I had imagined this moment many times during the months of planning and executing Madison's downfall, but hearing the actual defeat in my ex-husband's voice was more satisfying than I had anticipated. What's wrong, Richard? I asked, my tone neutral and concerned. It's Madison. She's in prison, Ella. She was convicted of fraud and theft, and I had to testify against her. The whole thing has been a nightmare. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I genuinely was sorry. Sorry that Emma had been hurt by the experience, sorry that Richard had been humiliated, but not at all sorry that Madison was facing the consequences of her choices. But that's not why I'm calling, Richard continued. There's something else, something I just found out. The fraud she committed, the money she stole, it wasn't just for me. She's been running similar scams for years, targeting older men who are going through divorces or other difficult transitions. This was news to me, though not entirely surprising. Predators like Madison rarely limit themselves to one victim. The police have been investigating her background, and they've found at least 4 other men who were defrauded by her over the past decade. The amounts are significant, Ella. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in total. Richard paused, and when he continued, his voice was even quieter. I've been such a fool. Everyone tried to warn me, but I wouldn't listen. I thought I was so smart, so successful, so capable of judging people. But she played me perfectly, and I fell for every lie she told. You weren't the first person to be deceived by someone they trusted, I said gently. And you won't be the last. But that's not the worst part, Richard said. The worst part is what this has done to Emma. She blames herself for encouraging me to marry Madison, for pushing you aside in favor of someone who turned out to be a criminal. She's been carrying this guilt for months, and I don't know how to help her. This was the part of the conversation I had been dreading. Emma's pain was real, and it was the one aspect of my revenge that I regretted. My daughter had been collateral damage in a war she didn't even know was being fought. Emma is stronger than you think, I told Richard. She'll learn from this experience and become more discerning about people's character. Sometimes painful lessons are the most valuable ones. Maybe, Richard said, but he didn't sound convinced. There's something else, Ella. Something I need to tell you, and I don't know how you're going to react. I waited, though I suspected I knew what was coming next. I've been thinking about what happened between us, about our marriage and our divorce. I realize now that I blamed you for things that weren't your fault. I made you feel like you weren't enough, like you needed to change to make me happy. But the truth is, you were exactly what I needed, and I was too stupid and selfish to appreciate it. Richard's voice cracked slightly as he continued. Madison showed me what it's like to be with someone who's truly selfish, someone who lies and manipulates and takes without giving anything real in return. The contrast made me realize what I had thrown away when I left you for her. I had dreamed of hearing these words for years, had imagined the satisfaction I would feel when Richard finally acknowledged his mistakes and admitted that he had been wrong to leave me for someone younger and more exciting. But now that the moment had arrived, I felt less triumph than I had expected and more sadness for the time and love that had been wasted. I appreciate you telling me that, Richard, I said carefully. But we can't change the past. We can only learn from it and try to make better choices going forward. I know that, he said quickly. I'm not asking for anything, Ella. I don't expect forgiveness or a second chance or anything like that. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I lost, and I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. There was a long pause, and when Richard spoke again, his voice was hesitant. There is one thing, though. One favor I need to ask, even though I have no right to ask anything of you. What is it? Emma needs you right now. She needs to see that it's possible to be a strong, independent woman without being cruel or manipulative. She needs to understand the difference between genuine confidence and the kind of fake perfection that Madison represented. Emma and I have been spending more time together, I said. Our relationship has actually gotten stronger through all of this. I know, and I'm grateful for that. But I think she needs to hear from you that it's okay to trust people again, that not everyone who seems charming and impressive is hiding something terrible. She's become so cynical, so suspicious of everyone's motives. Maybe some cynicism isn't a bad thing, I suggested. Maybe it will help her make better choices about the people she allows into her life. Maybe, Richard agreed. But I don't want her to become bitter and closed off from love because of my mistakes. After we ended the call, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about Richard's words and the journey that had brought us all to this point. My revenge against Madison had been more complete and devastating than I could have imagined. She had lost everything that mattered to her: her freedom, her reputation, her financial security, her social status, and any hope of rebuilding the life she had constructed through deception and manipulation. Richard had been forced to confront the reality of his own poor judgment and the consequences of his choices. He had learned the difference between love and infatuation, between genuine partnership and transactional relationships. Emma had received a harsh education about the difference between appearance and reality, about the importance of character over charisma, about the value of authentic relationships over superficial charm. And I had proven to myself and to everyone else that being underestimated could be the greatest advantage of all, that quiet strength was often more powerful than loud ambition, and that patience and intelligence could triumph over youth and beauty when applied with sufficient skill and determination. The phone call from Richard had been the final confirmation that my strategy had succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. Madison was destroyed, Richard was humbled, and Emma was wiser. But as I finished my coffee and prepared to start my day, I realized that the most important victory wasn't the destruction of my enemies or the vindication of my worth. The most important victory was the knowledge that I had protected my family from someone who would have continued to hurt them, that I had revealed the truth about someone whose lies were poisoning the people I loved most. Madison had called me perfect once, though she had meant it as a dismissal rather than a compliment. But in the end, I had proven that perfection wasn't about appearance or performance or the ability to manipulate other people's perceptions. Perfection was about being exactly who you were supposed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done, and accepting the consequences of your choices with dignity and grace. In that sense, I suppose I was perfect after all. 2 years after Madison's conviction and imprisonment, I was sitting in my garden on a warm spring afternoon, reading a book and enjoying the peaceful silence that had become my constant companion. The garden was thriving under my care, much like my life had flourished once I removed the toxic influences that had been poisoning it. Emma was visiting for the weekend, as she did every few weeks now. Our relationship had not only recovered from the Madison crisis, but had grown stronger and deeper than it had ever been. My daughter had learned to value authenticity over performance, substance over style, and she had developed a level of emotional intelligence that would serve her well throughout her life. She was engaged now to David, the boyfriend she had mentioned during that fateful dinner 2 years ago. He was a good man, steady, honest, hardworking, the kind of person who would never try to impress anyone with borrowed money or false credentials. Emma had learned to recognize and appreciate genuine character, and I was confident that her marriage would be built on a foundation of truth and mutual respect. "Mom," Emma said, looking up from the wedding magazine she was browsing, "I've been thinking about what happened with Madison, about how I fell for her act so completely." "What about it, sweetheart?" "I keep wondering if there were signs I should have seen, things that would have told me she wasn't who she pretended to be. I set down my book and considered her question carefully. There were signs, I admitted, but they were subtle, and they required the kind of life experience you didn't have at the time. Like what? Like the way she talked about other people when she thought no one important was listening. Like the fact that her stories never quite added up if you paid close attention to the details. Like the way she seemed more interested in being seen as successful than in actually helping people. Emma nodded thoughtfully. I remember now that she used to make little comments about you that seemed supportive but always made me feel like you were somehow lacking. I thought she was being diplomatic, but she was actually trying to turn me against you. That's exactly right. Madison was very skilled at manipulation, at making people feel like her cruelty was actually kindness. Do you think she ever genuinely cared about Dad, or was it all just an act? I thought about this question for a long moment. I think Madison was capable of caring about people, but only in terms of what they could do for her. She cared about your father's money, his status, his ability to provide her with the lifestyle she wanted. But I don't think she ever cared about him as a person. That's so sad, Emma said. Not just for Dad, but for her. What kind of life is that where you never really connect with anyone? A very lonely one, I agreed. And ultimately, a very self-destructive one. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the afternoon sun filter through the leaves of the oak tree that had shaded this garden for decades. It was the same tree that had witnessed my marriage to Richard, Emma's childhood, and all the changes that had transformed our family over the years. Mom, Emma said eventually, can I ask you something that might be uncomfortable? Of course. Did you have anything to do with what happened to Madison? I mean, I know she brought it all on herself with her lies and her fraud, but sometimes I wonder if you helped things along somehow. I had been expecting this question for months, and I had thought carefully about how to answer it when it finally came. Madison destroyed herself, I said finally. All I did was make sure that the truth came to light. Emma studied my face for a moment, and I could see her trying to decide whether to push for more details. I'm glad it did, she said finally. Come to light, I mean, she was hurting all of us, and we didn't even realize it. Sometimes people need protection from individuals who don't have their best interests at heart, I said. That's what families do for each other. Emma smiled and reached over to squeeze my hand. You've always protected me, haven't you? Even when I didn't know I needed protecting. That's what mothers do. The conversation turned to lighter topics, wedding plans, career developments, mutual friends. But I could tell that Emma had gotten the answer she needed, even if it wasn't explicitly stated. My daughter understood that I had played a role in Madison's downfall, and she was grateful for it rather than judgmental about it. She had learned enough about the world to recognize that sometimes justice requires active participation rather than passive hope. As the afternoon wore on, Richard called to speak with Emma about some logistics related to the wedding. I could hear his voice through the phone, still carrying traces of the humility and uncertainty that had characterized him since the Madison disaster. Richard had not remarried, though it wasn't for lack of opportunity. He had become much more cautious about relationships, much more focused on genuine compatibility rather than surface attraction. He was dating someone now, a woman his own age who worked as a college professor and had no interest in his money or status, but he was taking things slowly and carefully. The experience with Madison had changed him in fundamental ways. He was more humble, more appreciative of authentic relationships, more aware of his own limitations and blind spots. In some ways, he had become a better person through the painful process of being thoroughly deceived and publicly humiliated. After Emma finished her call, she looked at me with a curious expression. Dad asked me to tell you something, she said. He wanted you to know that he's grateful for how you handled everything with Madison. He said you could have made things much worse for him, but you chose to focus on protecting the family instead of seeking revenge. I almost laughed at the irony of Richard's gratitude. If only he knew how thoroughly and systematically I had orchestrated Madison's destruction, how carefully I had planned every aspect of her downfall, how completely I had dominated a battle she never even realized was being fought. But his ignorance of my role was actually a testament to the sophistication of my strategy. I had achieved total victory while maintaining plausible deniability, had destroyed my enemy while appearing to be gracious and forgiving. Your father is a good man who made some bad choices, I told Emma. I hope he's learned from the experience and will make better decisions in the future. He has, Emma said confidently. This thing with Madison taught him the difference between love and infatuation. He won't make the same mistake again. As evening approached and Emma prepared to drive back to her apartment in the city, she hugged me tightly and thanked me for a lovely weekend. I'm so lucky to have you as my mother, she said. You're the strongest person I know, and you've taught me so much about what it means to be a woman of substance. After she left, I remained in the garden as darkness settled around me. The house was quiet, the neighborhood was peaceful, and I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from a job well done. Madison Sterling had entered my life as a threat to my family, as someone who wanted to erase my importance and steal my place in the hearts of the people I loved most. She had dismissed me as irrelevant, had worked systematically to undermine my relationships, and had treated me with casual cruelty because she believed there would be no consequences for her actions. She had been wrong about everything. I had not only survived her campaign against me, but had turned it into the instrument of her own destruction. Every lie she told, every manipulation she attempted, every cruel comment she made had ultimately contributed to her downfall. The woman who had called me imperfect was now living with the permanent consequences of her own imperfections. The woman who had seemed to have everything had lost everything that mattered. The woman who had thought she was untouchable had learned that everyone can be touched by someone with enough patience and intelligence. But the most beautiful aspect of my victory was its completeness. Madison hadn't just lost her money, her freedom, and her reputation. She had lost her sense of self, her confidence in her ability to manipulate others, her belief that she could charm her way out of any situation. She would spend the rest of her life knowing that she had been outplayed by someone she had dismissed as unworthy of consideration. She would carry the knowledge that her perfect life had been destroyed not by bad luck or unfair circumstances, but by the superior intelligence and strategic thinking of her victim. That knowledge would torment her far more than prison bars or financial ruin ever could. As I sat in my garden under the stars, I thought about the word that had started this entire saga: perfect. Emma had called Madison perfect, not understanding that perfection was often just another word for untested. Madison had seemed perfect because her lies had never been challenged, her schemes had never been exposed, her cruelty had never been answered with consequences. I had provided the test that revealed Madison's true nature, and she had failed spectacularly. But in the process, I had discovered something about myself that I hadn't fully realized before. I was capable of extraordinary patience, remarkable strategic thinking, and a level of determination that could overcome any obstacle when properly focused. I was capable of perfection in the truest sense of the word, not the artificial perfection of carefully curated appearances, but the real perfection that comes from being exactly who you need to be when the people you love are threatened. Madison had thought she was perfect until she wasn't. But I had learned that I was perfect in all the ways that actually mattered, as a mother, as a protector, as a woman who would never allow anyone to diminish her worth or threaten her family. The quiet victory was mine, complete and permanent and deeply satisfying. And in the end, that was all the perfection I needed. And that's how Ella Sanders achieved the most complete and satisfying victory imaginable, not through loud confrontations or dramatic gestures, but through patient intelligence, strategic thinking, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing your own worth. Madison learned too late that dismissing someone as irrelevant can be the most dangerous mistake you ever make. Thank you for joining us for another incredible story on Her True Stories. If Ella's journey of quiet revenge and ultimate triumph resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that being underestimated can be your greatest advantage, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of strength, survival, and justice. Remember, beautiful souls, true perfection isn't about how you appear to others. It's about being exactly who you need to be when the people you love are counting on you. Sometimes the most devastating victories are the quietest ones, and the most perfect revenge is simply allowing someone to face the consequences of their own choices. Until next time, keep standing in your truth, keep protecting what matters most to you, and keep believing in your own incredible power.